There exists a particular kind of silence that follows the death of a legend, a silence so profound it becomes deafening. In that silence, secrets surface, grudges reveal themselves, and sometimes the absence of a single person speaks louder than the presence of thousands. When Johnny Carson drew his final breath on a winter day in 2005, the world expected mourning, tributes, perhaps even reconciliation. What they got instead was a ghost story, one that had been haunting Hollywood for nearly 20 years. This ghost had a name, a voice, and a broken heart. She wasn't invited to say goodbye, but somehow she became the most present absence in the room. How does someone who never attended a funeral become its most talked about guest? The answer lies in a betrayal so profound, a friendship so shattered, that even death couldn't heal the wounds. January 23, 2005 marked the end of an era nobody was truly prepared for. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, the man who had defined American late-night television for 3 decades slipped away quietly, his lungs finally surrendering to the emphysema that had stalked him for years. Johnny Carson was 79 years old, and in death he remained as enigmatic as he had been in life. His nephew Jeff Satsing delivered the news to a stunned nation with clinical brevity, a statement that somehow captured the essence of the man himself. The family's loss would be immeasurable, he said, and there would be no memorial service. No service, no funeral, no gathering of Hollywood's elite to share stories and shed tears. For a man who had entertained millions, who had been welcomed into American living rooms every weeknight for 30 years, who had made stars out of unknowns and legends out of stars, the final exit was almost absurdly private. But this decision surprised no one who truly knew Carson. His longtime colleague Dick Cavett had once observed something remarkable about Johnny, something that seemed almost paradoxical for someone in his profession. Carson could command an audience of 20 million viewers with ease, performing with the confidence of a king in his kingdom. Yet put him in a room with 20 real people and he would practically dissolve into discomfort. The studio lights were his shield, the camera his confidant, the audience a safe distance away. Ed McMahon, who had sat beside him for thousands of broadcasts, famously captured this contradiction perfectly when he noted that Johnny was completely at ease before 20 million strangers, but utterly awkward in front of 20 acquaintances. The most public man in America was, in truth, the most private soul. He had spent his entire career revealing just enough to seem knowable while remaining fundamentally unknowable. So his body was cremated, his ashes given to his wife Alexis Mass, and the world was left without a place to gather, without a ritual to mark the passing of the king. The tributes came anyway, flooding in from every corner of the entertainment world and beyond. President George W. Bush spoke of him as a steady, reassuring presence in American life. Jay Leno, who had inherited the Tonight Show throne in a succession that Carson himself had complicated, called him the gold standard against which all others would be measured. But it was David Letterman, the man Carson had quietly championed as his true successor, who seemed to understand the weight of the loss most deeply. All of us who came after are pretenders, Letterman said, his voice thick with emotion. We will not see the likes of him again. Fans created makeshift memorials at his star, on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and at Johnny Carson Park, the small patch of green across from NBC Studios where history had been made night after night. Yet for all these tributes, for all the flowers and handwritten notes and tearful remembrances, something crucial was missing. Someone was missing. And in that absence, a question began to form in the mind of those who knew the real story, who understood the hidden history behind the polished public image. If there had been a funeral, who would have been the most unexpected guest, whose presence would have shocked everyone? The answer wasn't about who might have shown up that day. It was about who had been absent from Johnny Carson's life for so long that her name had become synonymous with his only acknowledged enemy. The ghost haunting his final chapter wasn't really a ghost at all. She was alive, working, performing, carrying the weight of a friendship destroyed and a forgiveness never granted. To understand how everything fell apart, you must understand how it began. Early 1960s, Joan Rivers scraped by in Greenwich Village comedy clubs, sleeping in her car, working temp jobs. She was banned from Jack Paur's Tonight Show after one appearance. By her 7th audition for Carson's Tonight Show, she was 31 and hearing her career was over. February 17, 1965 changed everything. The booking was a petty invite arranged through her manager, who also represented Bill Cosby. Rivers walked on stage expecting failure. But something magical happened. The audience connected instantly. She was incandescent when her set ended and she sat beside him. Carson said 5 words that altered her life. "You're going to be a star." Rivers recalled looking over her shoulder, confused about who he meant. But Carson became her champion. She appeared nearly 100 times over 20 years, developing chemistry audiences adored. He was cool and unflappable. She was brash and hilarious, making him laugh until he cried. When Rivers launched a daytime show in 1968, Carson was her first guest. By 1983, she was The Tonight Show's permanent guest host. She was the heir apparent, turning down competing offers to stay loyal to Carson. But here the story darkens. For all their warmth on camera, Rivers and Carson barely had a relationship off camera. Their friendship existed entirely in front of cameras, performed for America. During commercial breaks, they had nothing to say. Carson built walls around himself that even trusted collaborators couldn't penetrate. Their relationship was a professional hierarchy disguised as camaraderie. He was the king who discovered her. She was the subject who owed everything to his blessing. By the mid-1980s, cracks appeared in Rivers' security. In 1985, Carson signed a 2-year NBC contract, but Rivers only got 1 year. She saw it as a signal NBC was uncertain about her future. Then came the real blow. A memo circulated listing comedians being considered to replace Johnny when he retired. Rivers' name wasn't on it. She concluded NBC would never give the job to a woman. Her role as permanent guest host was a ceiling, not a stepping stone. Fox, a fledgling network, approached her with an irresistible offer, her own late-night show in Carson's exact time slot for $10 million. Rivers was trapped between loyalty and survival. Her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, advised her not to tell Carson until the contract was signed. Other comedians who left The Tonight Show were immediately banned. If she told Johnny and the deal fell through, she'd have nothing. Worse, Carson could kill the deal with one phone call. So she stayed silent. The weekend before the announcement, the news leaked. According to Rivers, she immediately called Carson to explain. She told him she was leaving for Fox. He said nothing, then hung up. She called back, thinking they'd been disconnected. He hung up again. They never spoke again. Carson's version was different. He claimed the call never happened, that he learned about her show from a press release like everyone else. He felt blindsided and betrayed. Rivers believed his extreme reaction revealed something darker. Because she was a woman, Carson assumed ownership over her. "I think he felt that as a woman, I was just his, that I wouldn't leave him," she wrote. "A man leaving to compete was ambition. Woman leaving was treason. The king had been defied, and his wrath would be absolute." Carson used his power ruthlessly. Rivers was permanently banned from The Tonight Show, but it went further. Carson created a blacklist. Anyone appearing on Rivers' show would no longer be welcome on The Tonight Show. For celebrities, the choice was simple. Almost everyone chose Carson. Rivers couldn't book A-list guests. An NBC executive allegedly told her, "We are going to destroy you." The Late Show premiered October 9th, 1986, and immediately struggled. Behind the scenes, Edgar clashed with Fox executives. After less than a year, Fox gave Joan an ultimatum: "Fire your husband or we fire you both." She refused. In May 1987, Fox fired them both. The professional humiliation was devastating, but it was about to be overshadowed by unimaginable tragedy. 3 months after they were fired, Edgar Rosenberg took his own life. In her darkest moment, Joan Rivers was completely alone. Her career was ruined. Her husband was dead. And from the man who had once called her a star, there was only silence. Johnny Carson never called. He never sent a note. He never expressed a single word of condolence. This transformed their feud from a Hollywood dispute into something revealing a capacity for cruelty that shocked everyone. His grudge overrode any impulse toward compassion. As Rivers said, "It was like Stalin had sent me to Siberia. The king's sentence was absolute." Now we return to January 2005. As news of Carson's death spread, the unresolved feud with Joan Rivers came to everyone's mind. She became the ghost story everyone wanted to tell. In the absence of a real funeral, her story became the eulogy he never got. She was the unexpected guest at a funeral that never happened. Rivers's reaction was as complicated as their history. She called him a mean son of a bitch, but also acknowledged he was the most brilliant straight man who ever lived. The pain was still fresh after nearly 2 decades. She didn't regret taking the Fox show, but mourned that Grace Carson refused. After everything, she said, after the Fox show and the firing and Edgar's suicide, Johnny should have had me back on the show and said, "Where you been?" It would have made all the newspapers. It would have been a moment of forgiveness from the classiest man on television. But it never happened. Even years after his death, Rivers searched for closure. On her reality show, cameras followed her to the cemetery where Carson's ashes were interred. She spoke to the empty air in a final, heartbreaking attempt to make peace. This is why Joan Rivers was the true guest at Johnny Carson's funeral. While Carson retreated into private silence after retiring in 1992, Rivers lived with the consequences publicly. She became the sole historian of their broken friendship, telling her side because his side was only silence. At his death, her voice and pain were the loudest echoes of his past. The unexpected guest wasn't a person in a church. It was the unavoidable, tragic memory of the one person he built up with 5 words and destroyed with a telephone click. Johnny Carson got exactly what he wanted. He exited quietly, privately, with no public spectacle. But that silence was filled by the one story he could never control. The most unexpected guest at the end of his life wasn't a person at all. It was a memory that refused to die, the memory of a friendship he created. With a single sentence and destroyed with a grudge he carried to his grave, it stood as a final testament to the absolute loyalty he demanded and the unforgivable price of betrayal in the court of the king of late night.